Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay in the back? Awesome. Well, welcome. We're so glad that you're here for today's dialogue with Brandy Hudson and the dialogue today is called Reimagining Child Welfare as a Child Connection System. My name's Alice Egan, and I coordinate the Title IV program at the Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work. I know lots of you, but not all of you. Twice each year we gather for these public child welfare dialogues, and it always brings such joy to look around and see so many familiar faces from so many areas of social work and from the community. There's student trainees, social work colleagues from the community, and many, many School of Social Work and Title IV alumni. I'd say that this strong community is just what we need right now. I'm really eager to introduce you to our speaker, but before I do, just a couple of quick logistical items. Since we only have 90 minutes together, there won't be a formal break, but please feel free to get up and get more refreshments. There are two sets of restrooms out in the lobby, so one right outside the door and one across the lobby. If you indicated that you're interested in CEUs, those will be emailed to you in the next couple of weeks. We have your email from when you registered, and if you didn't register, just make sure you left your email address for us at the registration table, and we will send you our CEUs. So now on to the main event. Brandy Hudson just instructed me not to read her bio, so I'm not going to read her bio. She's going to introduce herself to you, but I will say that having gotten to know her over the last very short 12 hours, you are in for a treat. She is a person with extensive lived and professional experience and is going to spend the next 90 minutes talking to us and teaching us and also engaging you in conversation. So welcome, Brandy. We are so glad that you're here.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day to come hang out with me. I really do appreciate it. I feel really honored to be here. I have a ridiculous fear of public speaking, y'all. So, like, if you see me shaking, don't worry about me. I'll be all right. This isn't my normal stilo. I do a lot of work in child welfare, but it's a little bit different. So I spend a lot of time in deep relationship, with different jurisdictions and child welfare agencies to help them transform their practice. So standing up in front of a bunch of people I don't know is like my worst nightmare. But thank you for tolerating me and having me here. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and the bio thing, y'all. So y'all know how it goes. You have like this really disrespectfully long bio because you want people to believe like, oh, she actually may know what she's talking about, but I'm not going to subject y'all to that, right? Because that's just too much. So I am going to tell you a little bit about myself, but I am sparing you that ridiculous bio. So our first, okay. I am not a tech person traditionally, but I have been like trying to push myself. So this is a web-based presentation. It's not a PowerPoint. So can y'all clap for me because this is like a big deal, y'all. Okay. So, but that comes with a caveat, which is that it might fuck up. So if it does, it's okay because we just gonna talk, right? But I'm hoping that it will bear with me. So a little bit about me. I am a person with lived and professional experience in child welfare. The most important thing about me is that I am the mother of these 4 beautiful children who are my heartbeats. They are my reason for existing. They are everything, and they are really guiding and leading me. I feel like they teach me more than I could ever teach them, and I am growing into myself through the love that they give me, right? And so I feel very honored to have them as my children. I have been working in this raggedy system, y'all. I'm gonna be honest with you, it's kind of raggedy, for 25 years as a consultant, as a direct services practitioner, doing policy and practice and data and QA. That's why I didn't want you to read my bio. It's long and it's ridiculous. But I just want you to know that I have done a lot of stuff, right? And so you'll hear me say things and you'll be like, how is that even possible that she knows that or has done that? When she can't be more than 25 years old, right? Because I also realize I am just too radiant, right, to possibly have 25 years of professional experience, but I'm 45 years old. I just black don't crack, right? So the other thing is that I am a systems change consultant, right? And so I do spend a lot of time with jurisdictions across this country, with private agencies as well as public child welfare systems, helping them think through ways to improve what I believe to be a very raggedy system, as I already said. And fundamentally, I center the voice and the leadership of people who are impacted by child welfare and juvenile justice systems in everything I do, right? So any story I tell, any recommendation I make is going to be rooted, right, in the wisdom of the people who are closest to the problem. Right, and I would challenge all of you to do the same, right? For those of you who are currently practicing, in child welfare, if you're working in community-based agencies and you're interfacing with young people and parents, if you are emerging practitioners, right, for our students, I really encourage you to think about what it might look like, right, to center those voices in your work, and not just those voices, but that expertise. Right? And how do you know you're making a good decision about a change to your system if you haven't vetted it with the people it's going to impact? Right? It seems very simple, but it's not something child welfare has historically been very good at. Right? And so it's something that we need to continue to do. So that's a little bit about me. And now I want to hear a little bit about you guys. Just because I heard Alice say, we have some people and some people. And so obviously with however many people, we can't do real introductions, but I would love to know how many folks right in this room are currently social work students. Okay. How many of you are community-based providers? Shout out to the community. All right, community in the house. How many of you are working in child welfare currently? Okay. And how many of you are educators? Okay. Now this one you may not have to answer, it depends on your comfort level, but how many of you have lived experience in the system? Okay, all right. So that's good. It helps me kind of ground in who's in the room and who I'm talking to. So thank you so much for engaging with me in that way. So as Alice mentioned, today's talk is really about shifting, right, from a protection-focused system to a connection-focused system, right? And when I have this conversation with folks, it kind of raises heckles sometimes, right? Because it's what do you mean? We are child protection. We are to protect children. Yes, and I believe that to be fundamentally true, and I'm not saying that we don't protect children. I'm saying that we do that in the context of relationships and connection, right? And that's what today is going to be about. So next. So if we're going to be reimagining the child welfare system, it's important to ground in our current reality, right? And so what is our current system? So our current system is a protection-focused system. There are a number of challenges, right, with our system. One is that child welfare systems are overburdened and overwhelmed, right, with investigations. I work with a lot of jurisdictions who are we have a backlog, right? Families are often separated from their children without adequate support. Disproportionate impacts happen with communities of color, right? And so everything, I'm you're gonna be girl say everything is everything to her. But, racial justice, racial equity is so paramount to the work that we do in child welfare. We cannot do this work without recognizing that everything that we do has a disproportionately negative impact on children and families of color, right? That is the reality. The data bears that out, and we know it. And so what is our responsibility to change that, and how do we do it, right? And so that will come up a little bit throughout this presentation. No, this isn't a DEI or racial justice presentation, but you can't talk about child welfare without talking about racial equity, right? And so it's going to come up, right, because it is present, and it is actually, racial inequity is one of the largest drivers of child removal, right? And so we can't separate those things. And that, our current system and our current funding model for our system prioritizes removal over prevention. It just does. Family first, be damned, right? And so that is our current reality. And, some of the things that are happening and emerging, as a result of this reality is that 53% of Black children will experience a child welfare investigation in this country. That's wild, y'all, right? That's not normal. 1 in 3 families who experience poverty-related hardship are misidentified as neglect and abuse, right? And so when we talk about how are we going to change our system, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but one of the fundamental things is we need to get better at defining what child abuse and neglect is and what it's not, right? And so that's one big thing. And 90% of families that we serve need support and not separation, right? And so I will always give this caveat that there will be families who cannot be intact. That's just a reality, right? No matter how many supports, no matter how many services, no matter how hard, there will always be, right, a very small percentage of families for whom, right, reunification or family preservation isn't going to work. But that's only 10%. Right? And if we were better at keeping the 90% out of the system, we would be a lot better at dealing with those 10%, right? And so when we talk about, oh, the families are just so complex and, how are we going to do this? And it's like, well, because you're overburdened, right, with all the families who don't belong here, right? And so there are a number of things that we can do to kind of shift the system to make our caseloads, which I don't like that term, more reasonable, and to really focus our work on the families who actually need our intervention, right? And so the current system, it just treats poverty as neglect, and it responds with family separation instead of support. So this is just the current context, right? And I'm speaking for child welfare broadly, right? Recognizing that, again, I am in a bad position, right? Having this conversation with folks in Wisconsin when I don't know your system. I haven't done work here, right? And so I am not talking about your system specifically or trying to critique your practices or your policies, but what I will say is that you are part of a larger system that is raggedy. And so I can only assume yours is a little raggedy too, right? And so that's what we're going to be talking about. Now, so why do I have a problem with protection? Right? Because a protection-centered framework, it really focuses on surveillance and separation, right? And so it is really monitoring instead of supporting, right? And that's a problem, right? Because families don't need surveillance, right? They don't need to be separated. They need support. And it is a focus on risk over relationship, right? And so we're really good at doing risk assessments. Are we really good at doing relational assessments? Are we really good at figuring out who kids are connected to, who families' natural supports are, right? We are really hyper-focused on risk, right? And that is very problematic for a number of reasons that we'll get into. And that we harm kids and families in this system quite often, right? And so in our quest for protection, we are simultaneously creating new harms, right? And so those harms are trauma, primarily, right, through system intervention. And that looks like a number of different things, and we'll talk about some of them, but we have to also just recognize, right, that our system, while it is designed and, well-intentioned, to protect, that it is very harmful, right? And that's not a reflection on you as an individual, it is just the reality, right? And so I just also want to say that I'm not here to blame or shame, because again, I'm one of you. Right? I have done this work for a number of years in systems, been complicit in the bullshit, right? So I get it, but I also have to be honest with myself about what it is, because if I can't be honest with me, I can't be honest with the families that I serve, I can't be honest with the young people that I serve, and I can't be honest with the systems that I'm trying to help usher in transformation, right? And so we just have to be real about it. And I'm gonna get real with y'all today. Is that okay? Yeah. Can I just be real up in here? I cuss a little, I got issues, y'all, but it's okay, right? I'm nervous, I'm shaking, but we're family now, right? I'm gonna approach this as that we are in community, right? And because we're in community, I'm gonna hold you, right? And I'm going to make space for you, and I will believe that you are going to hold each other and make space for each other, and then you'll hold me and make space for me. Can we agree to that? Yeah. Okay, cool. So, I've never given this presentation before either, y'all, so I don't even know what's on the next slide for real, but we'll see. It's like a surprise. It's a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So when we think about reframing the purpose of child welfare, so we think about going from safety, right, being the absence of harm, to safety being the presence of connection. That's a really important and powerful reframe, right? We think about not focusing on removing children, but really thinking about supporting families, right? And so by doing these things, there's a number of other shifts that we're going to talk about, but we're really, and we talk about this a lot in child welfare and in social work, being strength-based, but what does that even mean, right? And it means that we are really focusing on what's possible and not what's wrong currently, right? And we address what's wrong currently, but in the context of the future that we want to co-create. right? And so it's a reframe that I think is important. And so the first, I'm going to ask y'all to talk to each other quite a bit. So I hope you like each other. And if you don't, I ain't got nothing to do with that because I'm going home tomorrow and it ain't my problem. But I would love for you guys to just have a quick conversation at each of your tables about why or if this resonates and what it would change, right, about the current system if we were to start thinking about it in this way. Just like 2 minutes. Yep. All right, I'm a woman of my word. That was 60 seconds. So I'm curious if someone would be willing to share. What do you think, based on your conversation or your own, personal beliefs, might be different if we were to think about safety as the presence of connection versus the absence of harm? What might be different about our practice? What might be different about our outcomes? What might be different about how people experience our system? Yes, ma'am.
One thing we talked about was the change of perception, but also in like legislature and funding resources, so then we can make sure that we have the ability to address like safety as a connection versus like a protection, because oftentimes there's either not those resources in certain counties that just don't have the funding for it. We also talked about this kind of shift from mandated reporting to mandated supporting, but the laws don't always support that either when it comes to like mandated reporting laws.
Anyone else have a different reflection or idea? What about shifting from a focus, from child removal to family support? And also any successes that you've seen in your system around any of these things would be really interesting to hear as well. Yes, ma'am.
Courtney over here, she specializes in teenage cases.
Mm-hmm.
So she was talking about really trying to find the best way to connect teens to parents.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you all. I think, this is a personal, right? And everything I say today is me, right? I'm not representing, anyone else's, experience. But I think as a young person in care, right? I was in foster care for 18 years, and I lived in 32 different placements during the time that I was in care. And I felt so disconnected, right? And I know that a lot of the decisions that were made, in terms of my case, if that's what you want to call it, I don't know. We're going to talk about language too, but it was very much like hyper-focused on safety. I'm going to put her in a group home. I'm going to put her in a locked facility. I'm going to put her in an institution. I'm going to put her in this step down, and she'll be safe, right? I did not feel safe, right? I felt the most unsafe you could ever imagine because I had no idea who actually cared about me. Like, I used to always think, if I die here, who will actually care? Right? Who will even know? Who will notice? I only see my social worker once a month. Will I rot in the basement for 30 days before anybody figures it out? Right? Like, it was a very unsafe feeling, right? Being in foster care and not having a connection, right, to actual human beings, right? That I felt seen, loved, valued, like all of those things. Like, I have never felt so unsafe in my life, right? And I'm gonna tell y'all, I grew up in the hood in South Central Los Angeles, right? And so I felt more safe on the streets. Like, I was in a gang, I ended up being duly adjudicated, all the things. I was safer on the streets than I was in foster care, right? And so when we have a conversation about safety, we need to really think about whose safety, right? And how do we know? And like, does that young person actually feel safe, right? And I think that's really important, right? And we're gonna talk more about that, but we have a very limited view of what safety looks like and what it means and what it feels like, and it does not reflect the experiences often of young people in our system and how they would define safety and how they would describe the experience that they're having in our system. So, next. And I say all this because what we know, right, from research, and I know that there's a lot of academics in this room, right? there's a lot of research out there, right, about what children need to thrive. There's a lot of research, particularly, around adolescence. I just finished up a research project with the Hudson Foundation about adolescent research. Like, what do adolescents in foster care actually need, and is it any different than adolescents, right, who aren't in foster care? Like, where are there divergences? Where is it the same? And how do we actually translate, right, that research into policy and practice in the child welfare system? Because our system is not research-based fundamentally, right? Like, the child welfare system was not designed based on research. It was designed based on a need, right? And there's no research to say that foster care as an intervention is actually effective, right? But we do it anyway. There's a lot of research to show that the interventions that we slap on top of child welfare are effective, right? So evidence-based practices, but we're kind of using those interventions and those practices on top of a very traumatic primary intervention, right? And so I think we need to just understand that healing, right, from trauma, particularly for children, it happens in the context of relationships. Right? And so if we want children to heal and to thrive, the only way that they're going to build their resilience and recover from trauma is through human connection. Right? But a lot of our work isn't driven by that. Right? We're not thinking about connection, we're thinking about placement. We're thinking about, is there a bed for this child? And we're not thinking about, is this child rooted, right, in a home, in a family, and do they actually feel the presence of belonging? And without that, all of the other interventions aren't even going to work. That's the other thing. Like, we subject children to like a number of different therapeutic interventions, and if those aren't rooted in an attachment relationship, they don't work. Right? And so we need to get really clear about what our primary intervention needs to be, right, in foster care, and it is relationships. The best thing that we can do for the children that we hope to protect is to have them rooted in relationship. The primary relationship that children need to thrive is the parenting relationship. Right? And so we just need to understand that, and research bears that out. And when we think about attachment, trust, and belonging, those things are built over time. Right? We also have this really wicked thing that we do where we'll pick a kid up like a little piece of baggage, and say, hey, you're going from here to here. Here's your new home. This is where you live. This is your family. And it's like, what? I don't know these people, right? I don't trust these people. I haven't had time. Like, no one's like helping me really like build attachment and feel like I belong here. And then we're surprised when we have to pick that child up and put them somewhere else. And then the same thing happens when we got to pick them up and we got to put them somewhere else, right? Because when we say we're placing a child, that's what we're saying, right? You placed something. I placed my water here. And then I picked up my water and I placed it over here. Right? And so in all of our placing, are we doing relationship work? And if we're not doing relationship work, we are creating ridiculous amounts of harm for young people, right? Because every single placement move or placement disruption is actually a missed attachment or a broken attachment. It is a shattered relationship, right? So I just want us to like really ground in like what I'm saying. And it's really, I think, very important, because when I talk to young people across the country, what they want is a relationship with someone, right? Oftentimes their parent, right, is their primary relationship, but they really, even while they're in foster care, want to feel, right, like they belong, right? Like, you want me here. I'm part of your family, even if it's only for a short time, right? And so we have a responsibility to those young people, and by extension, right, to the foster parents or resource parent. I don't know, what language do y'all use here? Foster parent, resource parent, caregiver? Foster parent. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we also have a responsibility to foster parents to make that possible. So I was a foster parent, I was a kinship parent and then became a foster parent. I was like, oh, never mind. So it was a very short time. But the reason for that is because I remember very clearly going to my tip snap training, right? And them saying to me, you need to treat this child as though they are your own. And I'm like, I got you, sis. Like, I got that. Like, yep, they my baby. Who coming up in here? And then every decision that they made, acted like that wasn't my child. Right? I had no voice, I had no choice, I had no say, I had no standing, but I'm supposed to treat this child like they're my own. Right? It is, we double talk a lot in this system. I talk about it like the lies that we tell. And that's one of the lies that we tell, is we want foster parents to treat kids like their own, except we actually don't. Right? And so, if we want children, to have that connection and that belonging, we need to treat foster parents as though that's actually what we want from them. And that, okay, so I just want to say something about attachment, because I know this gets really wonky, and I do a lot of work with a professor out of Tulane, Dr. Charlie Zena, and he is a expert on attachment, right? He did a lot of work about orphans and orphanages in Romania, and he's amazing. But one of the things that he always says is that child welfare gets it very wrong around attachment, right? Because it's this either or thing. Are they going to be attached to their birth parent, or are they going to be attached to their foster parent? And an attachment can transfer from one parent to another, from one loving caregiver to another. And so the idea that, this child is attached to their caregiver, so now we can't reunify, is wild, right? Because by virtue of that child being able to attach to that caregiver, we know they have the capacity to attach to their biological parent when they return home, right? And so that's why, again, research is so important for us to ground in, right, in the work that we do, because then our policies and our practices need to reflect that, right? And so relationships are the active ingredients of healing, right? And so it's not the program or the service, it's the connection, right? And even when I talk to young people, I've talked to a lot of young people who are in group homes, or, who are I don't want to go to a family, right? And it's really? Tell me about that. Why don't you want to go to a family? What is it about the group home, that you really like? Oh, the staff, Miss Murray. It's never the group home. It's always a person, right? And so if we can leverage that, yes, you want a person, we can do that for you in the context of a family, right? But we just say, they like being in a group home, it's easier for us, we'll just leave them there, And so really understanding, what do children want? What do they desire? And how can we help to facilitate that for them, right, in a way that feels safe? So, when children feel securely connected, they develop resilience and can overcome adversity and trauma, right? And so we talk about resilience a lot with older youth, and I used to get mad offended, y'all, because I remember having gone through a lot, right, in the system, and people saying to me, social workers and attorneys and judges, but Brandy, you're just so resilient. It'll be fine. You're resilient. And I'm so you gonna hit me with your car because I'm resilient? What the hell? That's what it felt like. So basically what you're saying is bones heal, so it's okay. You can knock my kneecaps off. It felt so disrespectful, right? Yes, right, you can build resilience, but you build resilience through people, through relationship, through connection. And so I wasn't actually resilient because I didn't have those things. What I was a tough son of a bitch. And I was I ain't gonna let none of y'all break me, right? And so that was kind of my thing. When I was in care, I was very, very determined, not to let them break. It was a game, right? And so that was the game that I was playing in my head, was you're not gonna get the best of me. You're not gonna do this, right? Because as they said, I was oppositional defiant. I wasn't, I was just feisty, and so, but they were but you're just resilient. And I'm no, actually, I'm not. I would be if you actually help facilitate relationships and belonging, then maybe I could build some resilience. But I left foster care at 18, transitioned into homelessness, and it took maybe 20 years for me to resolve the trauma, right, from the system. It never happened when I was in the system. It didn't happen soon after. It was a very, very, very long journey, because that's how long it took me to build a community, right? And so until I had my community, I couldn't heal. And that's just true, right? And it's true for kids. So relationships, y'all gonna be I'm tired of her saying relationships. Relationships, connections, right? It is everything. Trust me on this. And so if we've talked about a child protection system, right? What would a child connection system look like, right? And so a child connection system would prioritize relational permanence. I feel that's a dirty word sometimes in child welfare, right? Because legal permanence is the gold standard. That's what we want, because that's what we're measured on, right? Timeliness to permanency, rate of permanency. But all of that is in the context of legal definitions, right? That is not always what children need or care about. And so really embracing the idea of relational permanence, thinking about lifelong connections for children, even when it's not someone who can adopt them, right, is really important. The other thing is that we, in the current system, don't really prioritize family, culture, and community. In fact, we undermine family, culture, and community oftentimes for young people when they come into our system, right? And so a child connection system would actually see those things as sacred, because they are. And a child connection system would prioritize prevention and support, right? This one, you know, investing in families before a crisis occurs, it sounds good, but we know how 4E funding works, right? And so that's always the challenge, is our system is currently funded in such a way, right, that we have limited capacity to do primary prevention, but a connection-centered system would give us the opportunity to do that. And we'll talk about some policies and things that, you know, could actually support that, but fundamentally, that's what is needed, right? And so connection-centered systems fundamentally recognize that safety is found within relationships and not in their absence. Right? All right. So, some guiding principles are: family is a healing context. What do you think that means? Someone tell me what you think it means that family is a healing context.
I think like our traditional framework of like pluck and polish, like if we just take them out of this one setting, and then that's gonna give the parents some time just to be by themselves, fix all things that are wrong with them, polish them up, shine them up, then we'll bring them back together, thinking that that's the solution, like that's the equation that's gonna work.
Yeah.
But really it's like, if I were in the hospital diagnosed with diabetes, it's super easy for me to eat well there because bringing food to me. But I'm not really like learning the skills of like, how do I navigate these stresses and keep myself healthy and my family healthy. So yeah, sometimes treating people in silos and isolation, like you can't heal unless you're all kind of moving alongside each other to do that process.
Yes, and so what we do is we remove a child, we place them over here and say, all right, we're gonna give them some interventions and services. We work with the parent over here to try to, you know, maybe help them heal, probably not, but at a minimum, they can get some classes and, you know, some drug tests and some other bullshit or whatever, right? And so then we say, and now we're gonna bring you together. And it's like, wait a second, like if we have healed separately, or in most cases not healed at all, and then you put them together, but you're gone now, right? How does that work out? And so if you actually, while a child is removed from their parent, do that healing in the family setting, and so we're going to talk about family time, or what most places call visitation, but like how do you make that meaningful and impactful and actually use it as a healing space, right? That is very, very important, and it's an opportunity that's often missed, right, in child welfare. And then, you know, it's really strength-based approaches that focus on capacity building and not identifying deficits. Now, this one, we will always identify deficits, right? Because when a referral comes in, right, and we're doing an investigation, yes, we are going to identify deficits, but that's not our goal, right? Our goal is to identify strengths and to leverage those to address the deficits, right? And so the deficits are just a fact, right? But the strengths are the secret sauce, and that's our stuff, right? Like that's what we can use to actually create change with that family. And cultural continuity, really focusing on honoring and preserving cultural identity as a protective factor for children. Right? I have talked to so many young people in the system who have been removed from their, not just their family, but their cultural identity, their community, everyone that looks like them, you know, and that is very harmful and traumatic as well. So recognizing that keeping that continuity of culture actually is a protective factor. So when we say we want to protect kids, let's keep them connected to their culture, right, and their identity and their community. And really emphasizing, again, support over surveillance. When I talk to parents who have been impacted by the child welfare system, and I, as a parent who has been impacted by the child welfare system, it feels like constant surveillance. It's like they're watching. Y'all, my case, right, was in 2000. It is 2025. I still every day am like driven by, what if CPS came knocking today? So before I leave my house, I am compulsively, looking at the fridge. Is there food? Is it clean enough? Are the, socket covers in? Like, if CPS came to my door today, is there any way that they could have reasonable suspicion, right, about anything? 25 years later, as a child welfare professional, as someone who does the work that I do all over the country, there's not a day that goes by that I don't make decisions based on this idea of being surveilled. It drives my parenting. When my 13-year-old says, hey, can I go to the park with Evan? I'm like, well, no, because Virginia law technically says that any child under the age of 18 can't be left unsupervised. Now, of course, I want my child to go to the park and have fun, but if I can't be there physically with him, can I risk letting him go? Because what if, God forbid, something were to happen, right? It's actually ridiculous, but it's my reality, right? And it is a form of harm and violence, right? And so I tell people, like, I live under the threat of violence every day. And it is tough, okay, y'all? Even what I do, who I am, because I know none of that means anything, right? Because if CPS comes knocking, it's not gonna matter. It is not gonna matter who I know, what I did, what presentation I gave, what policy I wrote, what book I dropped. They're gonna be like, no, your black ass about to be doing these services like we said you did, you need to, or you ain't gonna see your babies again. Period. The end. Right? Because that's how power works. And that's the other thing that we don't talk about a lot in this system is the power dynamic and the power differential and how that plays out. And when we talk about, even doing, preventative or early intervention services, and we say like, oh, it's voluntary. We all know it's not really voluntary. Right? And we have the power at any time to revoke that safety plan, right? To revoke that in-home support plan, to go in a different direction. And that power, right, it looms over families and over youth. No matter how nice you are. You might be a very nice social worker, but you still hold that power, right? And so how do we think about ways to shift power in our system? So that folks can actually feel like they have some level of autonomy, right, in a system that was really designed to take all of it away. And let's see, what's next? So these are some things, what connection can look like. And so a lot of these are things that I actually do, in my work. One is really shared parenting, right? And this one I have found to be extremely powerful, particularly as it relates to children and their ability to have and maintain continuity of relationship. And I'm going to tell you why. So for a lot of young people who come into foster care, and I'm sure you've heard this before, they very much love their family of origin. And then they're placed, right, with a family that if they're lucky, they will, develop a relationship with, they will feel bonded, they will feel belonging, and they will attach, right? And now there's a sense of divided loyalty, right? Because I really don't want to upset my mom, but I really love Miss Jenkins, and I don't want to upset Miss Jenkins by saying something nice about my mom, right? And it gets real dicey for young people, and they have to make a lot of choices that are very difficult, and it's very stressful. And so when you can build a relationship between a birth parent and a foster parent, it actually eases the stress and the trauma that children experience during their separation. It also provides an additional protective capacity for birth parents because now they have another resource, right? And so that foster parent can actually be a support person for them. But it's also because when a child, how do I say it? So I believe in reunification, 100%. But I don't think reunification means that now this child will never see the person that they lived with for 3 years again. And that's kind of how our system operates now, right? It's like, okay, reunification, thank you so much, Ms. Jenkins, for the last 3 years of, taking care of, bathing, showing up for kissing boo-boos, reading bedtime stories. Like, you've done your service. God bless you. You'll never see this child again, right? That's harmful to that resource parent or foster parent, but it's very harmful to the child. Because it's like, wait, I didn't know I had to give up this to get this, and why should I? Right? And so when you have a strong relationship between a birth parent and a foster parent, that child can enjoy the continuity of relationship with that foster parent even when they reunify. And on the flip side, if they end up being adopted by that foster parent, they can still enjoy a relationship with their family of origin and their birth parent, right? And so it really is a way to ensure continuity of relationships. And the other thing I'm going to say is that when we talk about relationships, right, we're talking about youth and, their parents and children, but there's like often other kids in this scenario, right? So if a foster parent has biological children or other foster children, those children are bonding with each other, and they have sibling bonds that now are disrupted. And what we know from research is that sibling bonds are even more powerful in many contexts than parent-child bonds, right? And so if we are constantly not just disrupting, their primary attachment, but also their sibling attachments, it's just compounded trauma. And then you also are doing that same trauma to the children in that home, right, who aren't the foster child. And it is so harmful. And when I talk to, resource parents or foster parents who are closing their license, oftentimes what they say is like, I can't do this to my kids anymore. Like, they cry uncontrollably, right, when who they believe was their brother and sister is just gone, right? And the way we do transitions in foster care is ghetto, right? So that's another big piece of it. Like, it is wild to me. Like, I remember when I was working in child welfare, and it was like, oh, we went to court, and it's like the reunification order was signed, so we're going to take the child home today. I'm like, wait, what? Today? Like, we ain't gonna do no like planning. We're not gonna do like a transition. We're not gonna have a conversation. We didn't even tell the foster parent that decision might be made today. So they're at work. We're gonna just pick up the child from school, take them to the parent's house, and then go to the foster parent's house afterwards and pick up their stuff. Like, it is horrible, right? And so our transition practice, the way that we transition young people from one family to another, even if it's their family of origin, even if it's a kinship family, it creates a ton of harm, right, and trauma. And when I was working with birth parents, oftentimes they were stuck, right, because they're like, yes, I want my child to come home. Like, I've done all these things, that's great, but I didn't know it was going to be today, right? And so, like, I'm not ready. I'm just not ready, right? And they don't want to say that, though, because what if you take it back? So if I tell you, oh, okay, you call me and say, hey, good news, like, whatever. If I say no, does that mean it's no forever? Does that mean that now you think I don't actually want my child? Does that mean, you know what I mean? And so, like, we create all of these dynamics that are very, very harmful for folks in what we think is doing a service, right? And so I've had so many birth parents say, like, I know they thought they were helping me, but it actually ended up being really harmful, and their kids sometimes end up back in the system, right? Because they weren't ready. So our transition practice, y'all, if you don't take nothing else away from today, thoughtful, meaningful, planned transitions, including the first one, right? You can do a thoughtful removal. It is possible. Everyone says, but it's an emergency. Not every damn removal is an emergency. Not everything happens at 3 o'clock in the morning on the side of the road with law enforcement. Y'all lying, right? And so, like, what does it look like to be able to do thoughtful, planned, right, separations? So, yeah. What else we got on here, y'all? How much time we got? Oh, Lord, we only got 30 minutes left. No, that's not cool. Okay, sorry. All right, guys. Oh, Lord Jesus. Let's see. And so I will say this. So I am, someone who does system transformation work, right? And like, typically when people think of like systems transformation and systems change, it's like, oh, there's the frameworks, there's this, there's the tools, there's but connections are a form of system transformation, and they are a system transformation strategy, right? And so not everything is a data metric and a tool or whatever, and so connection should be seen as an opportunity to do real system transformation. And what we know is that when connection is present, that there are better outcomes across indicators, right? So you can look at higher education achievement, improved mental health, right? Reduced homelessness for young people. All of those things are better the more connected they are, right? We know that connections reduce system reentry, right? Because when a parent is connected and they have a support system, they have resources, right? And so when things get dicey, as they often will, because here's the thing, y'all. When my son came back home, he wasn't the same child that left. When my son came back home, I wasn't the same mother, right, that he knew. And it took a while, right, for us to relearn each other, right? And it didn't mean I loved him any less. It didn't mean he loved me any less. It meant that we had experienced life apart for so long that we had to learn or relearn how to experience it together. That's real, right? And so with that can come conflict, can come hardships. And so if you don't have a support system as those things are playing out, it's likely, right, that it's going to end up in your child coming back into care. And it's unfortunate, but it's something that we can actually, like, I feel like re-entry is something we can actually address pretty well, right, if we're very intentional about it. If we do a really thoughtful transition, if we do some follow-up services, right, if we make sure that parents have natural supports, like, that shouldn't be an issue, right? So that's something that we really can change. And then making sure that we're equity and well-being centered. And I know I said I was going to talk about this, but like, we have to understand the racial disparities that are present in our system, right? And so we talk about overrepresentation a lot, right? So more people, young people of color coming into the system, more families of color being surveilled and, being subjected to an investigation. But then there's this whole other issue of treatment once they're here. Right? And we like to pretend sometimes they're like, oh, it's not about race, it's poverty. Like there just happen to be more black poor people. Reservations just happen to be poor, so that's why we got so many indigenous kids, right? And that's out of our control. Then how do you explain, right, the indicators in your system? How do you explain that black children are 3 times more likely to have a TPR than white children? How do you explain, that black children are twice as, likely to get pregnant? Like all the things the disparate outcomes, right? So I'm like, I don't even want to argue with you about overrepresentation because we could spend all day talking about disparity. And that is in our locus of control. Right, and I think we just need to be real about who we're serving, how we're serving them, right? How they're experiencing our system and what's driving those disparate outcomes. And we'll never know if we don't talk to the people who are experiencing our system. So I do a lot of racial justice work. That's kind of like my primary work these days, and has always been my work. But now more than ever with the world, I'm like, yes, I'm being called back into the fray, y'all. We got to get it together. But I've gone to systems who are like, yeah, we want to address disparities. And I'm like, okay, cool. So like, what have you done to talk to the black families in your system to understand what's driving some of these outcomes? And they're like, what do you mean? Like, we have the data. And I'm like, oh, that's nice. How do you contextualize that data in their lived experience so that you can understand what the drivers are, right? So the data is an output. Right? What are the processes that are happening in your system that are creating that output? And you won't know if you don't talk to families and children of color in your system and have a conversation with them specifically about racism, about bias, about disparate treatment, about all of those things, right? And they can educate you, right? And help you understand why you're seeing what you're seeing, right? A lot of, states are great about, we have our data, demographics, and we can see, and it's like, yeah, but do you know why? And are you even curious, right? And the why can't be solved by 18 of y'all sitting in a room with each other, talking about it and speculating. It's just not gonna ever happen, right? And so you have to be comfortable having uncomfortable conversations, period. Or else you're just gonna continue to have disparity, and I guess you're gonna ride it out because that's what the system's been doing for 400 years. And so when we think about the role of social workers in a connection-based system, some things, so what I'll say, and as someone who has worked in child welfare, we are not all powerful, right? No matter how principled you are, no matter how, grounded in your morals and your values you are a part of a system, right, that is driving a lot of what's happening. And so you can't wave a magic wand or say, I want to change this and it's going to magically happen, right? So I want to also be real about, I get that this is very difficult work, and I get that there are a lot of constraints. I always talk about the container of child welfare, right? Because that container honey, it's not easy to navigate, right? And it has a lot of constraints. But there are some things, right, that each of us as individuals can do. One is just challenging harmful narratives. So when you think about this system, what are some of the harmful narratives in child welfare? Like, what are some of the stories that we tell or allow, right, to exist without challenging that are harmful?
Families are not appropriate fit to care for their children, or for relatives to care for them, based on maybe things that happened in their past or their record.
Okay. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, or, you know, if they are a family member, like, they probably knew about the abuse anyway. Right? I've heard that so many times. Like, why would we place with grandma? Like, grandma had to know what was happening to the children, and she didn't do anything to stop it, right? So, like, those things, what other narratives? Yes, ma'am.
Because the last time they were involved, they're not going to do it again.
Okay. What else? Yes.
You don't have any control over what comes in the front door.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, it's inevitable, right? Their family has been with us, you know, the last 3 generations. We just, what are we going to do about it? Anything else?
Talking about like parents lacking motivation to change and stuff, like there are systemic barriers that inhibit that a lot of the time.
Yeah. If you really loved your child, you would comply. Yes.
Black people are inherently bad, and parents do not parent their children well. They only know how to use physical discipline. It's because of their culture.
Girl, now you let's get into it though. Okay, so so I do an entire training around Black parenting, right, and understanding. But one of the things that I'll say, and this is going to maybe rub people the wrong way, right? But when we talk about discipline, right, in Black families and Black communities, right, and the use of corporal punishment, right, and it's like, oh, well, the Black people just like to beat on their kids, right? Like, that is what people like will think, right, and they internalize that. I want to know where that learned behavior came from, right? And I want to know what's driving that need, right? Because what I'll say to you is that I've met very few parents who don't want to keep their kids safe, right? And as a Black parent in this world raising Black children, you believe, right, oftentimes that if I don't discipline them, the police will. If I don't discipline them, the next person will, right? Because that is taught through experience, right? We can look at all the dead Black children, across the country who have been murdered, right, by the police and others. But the other thing is, even going beyond that, when you talk, okay, so this is, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to go here because it's like not the point of this training, but I think it's really important to understand that when we think of the Black American experience, right, that first kind of like formative experience and the trauma, right, when we talk about generational trauma, we're not just talking about in child welfare. So trauma transfers from generation to generation, which means that those of us who are descended, right, from enslaved African folks, the trauma of the beatings that they endured during slavery have passed down generationally, right, through trauma. And so it is both learned, but it is also socialized, right? And oftentimes, and then there's another piece to this that's really important, which is that my mama beat me and I came out all right. Right? And so if you telling me I can't beat my child, are you saying there's something wrong with my mama? Right? And so you're really challenging, right, a person's worldview, right, of themselves, their childhood, and the parenting that they received. And in order to do that well, guess what it takes, y'all? Relationships, woo, woo, trust, what. So yes, so all of that, right? And so you can have those really difficult conversations, but it has to be in a very relational, like trust-based way, and it has to be non-judgmental, right? And so my goal isn't to convince you that you should never hit your child. My goal is to help you understand why you're using that discipline practice, where it comes from, where you learned it, and then alternatives that you might be able to use, and to understand the impact, right, that has. So I could say, yeah, my mom beats the hell out of me every day, and I turned out perfectly fine. That's a lie, y'all. I'm just gonna be honest with you. You think you're all right, you ain't really all right, right? And so that's the other piece of it, is like helping folks understand and like think back to a time, right, where you were whooped. Right, so you shared with me that your mom hit you with the extension cord oftentimes, like when you did things. Like, how did you feel, right after that happened? Did you feel connected to your mom? Did you feel loved? Did you feel cared for? And it's like, oh, well, if not, then was that actually effective, right? Because I'm pretty sure your mother wanted you to, change, or even change your behavior. How many times do y'all think whoopings actually change behavior in kids? It don't, right? And so they just get sneakier because they don't want to get whooped. And so it's also like helping, parents understand, right? And it's really important work, but it's something I wouldn't encourage white people to try to do. That's all I'm saying about that, right? Because it's also like when you talk about the safety and like folks feeling safe to even engage in those kind of conversations, like it happens best when they are, having those conversations with practitioners that are practitioners of color, right? And that come from similar backgrounds to them. It lands, different. So I'm not encouraging y'all to go have them conversations with black folks, but I want you to understand, right, some of the dynamics that are at play. And so some of the core concepts of protection through connection: proximity heals. Right? And so we talk a lot about proximity, particularly in the context of lived experience, right? And so the more proximate you are to the problem, right, the more solution focused you can be, right? Because you understand it from multiple perspectives, like you're invested, right, in solutions. But also for children, like they're more likely to thrive when they're close to the people and the places that matter to them, right? And so they heal in proximity. And so these are some more things, but with time I'm not going to go into them deeply. But when we talk about safety and we talk about connectedness or relationships, there are a lot of connections between these things, right? And so when we think about relational permanence, it's actually emotional safety. Right? And so if we say we're a safety-focused system, let's be thoughtful about all of the dimensions of safety. Right? Cultural connectedness is identity safety. Community care is collective safety. And sharing power is psychological safety. Right? And so if we say our business is safety, then we need to be about our business. Right? And it's not just the absence of harm, it's the presence of connection, but it's also all of the dimensions of safety, right, that are really important for kids. Y'all good with me so far? Okay. All right. And I'm going to give everyone these slides afterward too, if you want them, or if not. But I know sometimes it's like, dang, I wish I wrote that thing down, or, ooh, I like that. So I will make sure that everybody gets the slides. And so one way to kind of think about this is for us to reframe protection as relational safeguarding. And so, in traditional child protection, we see danger residing within a family and safety existing outside of it. Right? That's true, right? That's just kind of how we think about our work. But a connection-centered approach recognizes that safe, loving relationships are protective, right? And that is a protective capacity, a protective factor, right? And particularly those that are grounded in culture, community, and continuity. So if we think about our work as relational safeguarding, then we're asking ourselves, okay, we're thinking about making this decision, right? Or we're going to, implement a new policy, or, oh, we have this initiative. Ask yourself, is this actually going to protect children's relationships, or is it going to undermine them? Right, that's a question that I encourage folks to ask themselves all the time, right? So if relationships are sacred for children, then everything that we do in our system, we should be very conscientious around if this thing is going to actually enhance relationships and protect them, or if it's going to undermine and disrupt them. Right? And that's our responsibility, is to safeguard those relationships, right? To keep them intact. And so one way to think about this is that protection isn't just removing harm, it's surrounding children with people who love them, know them, and can help them heal. Because I'll tell you, how many of you are parents? Raise a hand. Okay. So when you think about what you want for your children, when you think about, oh my gosh, this is the world that I want my children to experience, like this is what I want, is your highest hope for your children that they don't get beat today? Is that how you measure your parenting or the quality of their life? Well, at least they didn't get hit today. I'm asking, like, honestly, like, is that how you think about what you want for your child? Girl, I don't know, but I'm just saying, like, you probably, but what I'm saying is, so if you go to sleep at night, okay, sis, if you go to sleep at night and you say, okay, I feel like I'm a good parent, right? And I feel like my child is having their best experience possible because no one has hit them. Right? No, we want way more than that for our kids. Like, we want them to have friends, we want them to be loved, we want them to be in activities, we want them to find the things that they're passionate about. But in child welfare, we stop at, they weren't physically harmed today. We've done our job. They're good, they're safe. That's not okay, right? And so if we want more and hope for more and expect more for our children, and that's not the bar that we're setting for ourselves as parents, like, it shouldn't be the bar we set for ourselves as professionals. Period. Right? And so we can't say, well, they weren't physically harmed, so we've done our job. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. So this helps us, right, think about moving from something like safety being something that we create by separating children from risk to something we build by connecting children to healing relationships. All right. So this one is just like, and when I wrote this, I was like, paradigm shift, I hate that damn word. Because I can't tell you how many paradigms we done shifted and ain't nothing changed, right? So that's the issue that I have with paradigm shifts. Like, we love to talk about paradigm shifts in child welfare, but we don't actually shift nothing. You know, and so it's like, I hear y'all had a paradigm shift, but like, where is the evidence, right, that something shifted? But yet I use that because it's resonant with people and they understand it, right? And so these are some of the things when we think about a paradigm shift from protection to connection, like, this is what it would look like, right? And so we already talked about centering strengths, preventing crisis through community support, having family and community-led wisdom, right? Proactively investing in families and their communities, and taking a community ecosystem approach, right? Children don't exist in a vacuum, right? They exist in the context of family. Families don't exist in a vacuum, right? They exist in the context of their community. And so if we really want to help children, we need a community ecosystem, right, in place that can support their family so that their family can in turn support them. Right? And I'm smiling because I was saying, I started as a community organizer. So I believe in the power of people, right? And I believe in the power of community. So, oh girl, we ain't gonna talk about Sarah. Let's see. Sorry, Sarah girl. And so when we think about a vision for change, right? These are some of the things, and I've had a conversation with a few people, right, before this, who work for DCF, and it was interesting to hear that, y'all are thinking about a lot of these things already, right? Which is really helpful. But really thinking about what would it look like to redirect resources, right, to the community to build an infrastructure where families can get support before a crisis occurs, right? And so oftentimes, at least in my experience, when we're making a removal, like, that parent may have had 4 or 5 referrals at that point, right? And so none of those 4 or 5 initially led to, right, enough risk to remove, but we knew something was going on, right? But it was like, oh, it's not our problem because it doesn't rise to this level. What would it look like if we had a community-based, like, system of support where we could say, we think you may need some support and some services, and we want to help you connect to those before we're 5 referrals later, where we actually have to make a separation. So I think that's something to really think about. And then family preservation, right? So family preservation is a great model, but if you ain't got no money, girl, I don't know what to tell you, right? Because like when we think about family preservation, it's really concrete support, right? Particularly when we think about